This is Nick Wills with Hoy Engineering. Welcome to the warehouse floor. Today, I have a wonderful guest named Ken Kieran. Ken, do you mind introducing yourself?
I'm Ken Kieran. I work for Hoy Forklift Systems, which is part of Hoy Innovations. I've worked in this industry, the forklift industry, for 20 years.
What have you been doing for the last 20 years?
I started in the business, actually with the service team because I came from outside the industry, so I had to learn all the ins and outs, and that was the best way to do it. I moved into sales, and now I'm our sales director here for our divisions in Utah and Idaho.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
It's awesome. So a little bit more background on Ken. Ken is our expert in forklifts everything. So when I'm working with a client and we've got a tricky situation or tricky application and I don't know what to do or what to recommend, I bring my problems to Ken and we work through this together, and Ken is usually always on par with exactly what we need to do. So today, I just want to go through a few different situations.
Sure.
When is the right time for a company to consider purchasing a forklift? What type of forklift? What type of aisles in a warehouse? If they're going to be operating inside of a warehouse, if they're not going to be operating inside of a warehouse. Just some basic questions that we want to go through today.
Well, I mean, the first thing that you need to consider is at what point does it make sense to purchase a forklift, right? A lot of companies can get away with just renting a forklift here and there. But when you start having truckloads come in, when you're moving lots of pallets, obviously it's more beneficial to purchase a piece of equipment as opposed to, what a rental rate looks like over time. It gets more and more expensive. So it's actually cheaper to finance a lift or to purchase a used lift to start. So once you get into that area of needing to move pallets every day, that's when you really need to consider, hey, I don't need to rent anymore. I don't need to borrow my neighbor's forklift anymore. I need to purchase one.
Totally. A really good question that we should be starting on is, all right, what type of forklift do we want to be purchasing? Because if you look out in the market, you're going to see lithium-ion forklifts. You're going to see lead-acid battery forklifts. You're going to see propane, diesel.
Right.
Talk to us a little bit about that.
So it's a big consideration, right? The first thing to think about is in the industry you're in, is there any requirements that say you cannot have an internal combustion engine piece of equipment? And the food industry is one I'd like to highlight. Or, if you have to have a clean room, obviously you want to stay away from IC trucks. You want to look at electric equipment. And then in the electric equipment realm, now there's, traditionally lead acid batteries, is kind of the original option, but lithium now has come into the marketplace and you have to make that decision. So within the electric forklift world, lead acid is well known, it's established, and we kind of know the quirks, the positives and negatives. Lithium is new. However, lithium shows great promise, and obviously it's more expensive, but it's higher energy density. You don't have the same kind of charging problems, and we can go into all those specifics. But first things first, do you need electric or IC? Now, IC is great if you're outdoors or you're doing general warehousing, because you can get pneumatic tires, which is better for rough terrain. You can also get cushion tires, which is good for indoor usage. And again, traditionally, narrow aisles are electric equipment. Larger space, you'd use an IC piece of equipment.
Let's quickly touch on weight capacity differences.
Sure.
I mean, can a lithium-ion battery-powered forklift yield the same lifting capacity as a diesel?
So technically, yes, but at some point, it's kind of cost prohibitive to do that. When you get in this 20,000 pound range, for example, a diesel's much preferable because it's less expensive, usually operated outside, whereas a lithium battery to power a lift that size would be hugely expensive, hard to deal with, hard to pull out of the truck to service, to do these things. So traditionally, larger lifts are diesel.
It's perfect. As we get into the warehouse and as our aisles begin to narrow, what are the different classes of forklifts that you sell and that you are constantly dealing with on a daily basis?
So narrow aisle starts at about 10.5 feet. And the reason it starts there is your traditional sit-down forklift won't fit in that aisle. And we do a right angle stack measurement, which shows, what can you put away in an aisle of what size. And so as you shrink the aisle, you start looking at things like stand-up end control lifts, which is just a forklift you stand up in. That way you have less of a counterbalance on the back, so it's smaller profile, or footprint, I should say. Then you get into a reach truck, which will work in a slightly smaller aisle. It is not counterbalanced. It is actually has outriggers, so it can work in a small aisle. And typically we sell those in, 9 to 10.5 foot aisles. That's kind of the sweet spot in the industry for tight, tall racks. And then if you go beyond that, you can go to a forward articulating forklift, like a flexi, which is a large lift actually that articulates in the front. That way you can the way it right angle stacks is such that even though the lift is bigger, it turns in the front and can put pallets away in a very narrow aisle from 6 feet to 8 feet. If you want to go narrower than that, when you want to really maximize the cube of your warehouse and aren't so worried about throughput, you'd get what's called a turret truck. And a turret truck, the way the mast works is it can go left and right, so it can pull a pallet in and out of the rack, but stay within its general footprint. So we use these in aisles anywhere from a very small one can work in less than a 60-inch aisle to what's more traditional is a 72-inch aisle.
Totally.
And again, the smaller you go, the more throughput you'll lose, meaning the time it takes to pick a pallet and bring it out of the aisle will get longer and longer the narrower you go.
The other thing that we have to take into consideration is different forklifts will work loading and unloading trucks.
Correct. So a reach truck cannot load and unload a truck. For one reason, they're usually too tall and they have outriggers and they can't get over the dock plates. So if you wanted to load and unload a trailer, you want to use a sit-down IC truck. You can use a sit-down electric lift or the stand-up end control, which actually was traditionally designed to unload trucks. So it's easy on and off. It has a small footprint, so it's very quick to access the truck, drop pallets, jump off, do paperwork, jump back on, load the truck again.
Totally.
One other consideration, though, also is as you get narrower, the price also goes up. As the equipment's more specialized, it's bigger batteries, things like that. So the price will go up the narrower you go. So for instance, if you just have an open space warehouse, you don't want to use a turret truck. You want to use a sit-down IC truck.
It's going to keep your costs down,
Correct.
give you more flexibility, allow you to operate different size pallets than what you'd be constrained to in a very narrow aisle.
And that's a good point. The narrower you go, the more you do have to consider your pallet size because it has to be able to fit within, in the rack system you've set up. So if the beam is so wide, and you can speak to this, you can't start putting weird sized pallets away because it won't fit, and the turret truck or the reach truck can't handle it if it's the wrong size. Whereas a sit-down IC truck sometimes doesn't have that consideration, especially if you're not putting stuff away in racks.
Totally. Some of my favorite applications are turret truck applications, and the biggest question is how consistent are your pallets? What's the size of those pallets? How often are you going to be changing pallets or products? And what's your potential of changing these products to go outside of the realm of a 40 by 48 inch pallet?
It's a very important question to ask because if you have mixed pallets, so say you have one wide pallet or non-standard pallet, you put it in that narrow aisle and there's overhang now. It's actually bigger than can fit on the rack and it overhangs. Now you're impeding the travel of that turret truck in that aisle. So turret trucks are great if you have lots of pallets that are consistent sizes, but if not, so if you don't have consistent size pallets, maybe you would want to open that, that rack up. So open that aisle width up and you could use something like a flexi, which is more selective, more capable to lift up different size pallets.
Totally. But still very narrow. You're still operating 7 to 8 feet.
Yeah, 8 feet and under, correct.
Totally. Another good consideration to maybe talk about, Ken, is talk to me about turret trucks and wire guidance systems.
Right. So with a turret truck, you're maximizing your space, maximizing the cube of your warehouse. And so you want this turret truck to fit as tightly in this aisle as possible to maximize that, space savings. So in doing that, you have no room for error on the left or the right side of that piece of equipment. So what they do is they do what's called wire guidance. So a turret truck, actually, there's a wire buried in the floor that has a certain hertz radio signature, and the turret truck picks that up and it stays on that wire when you're in the aisle. That way, you're not turning the wheel, you're not crashing into your rack, and the turret truck operates perfectly down that wire, so you can access pallets to the left and the right of the turret truck without worrying about lining up and doing those things. There's also another option, which is not wire guidance, but rail guidance.
Totally.
And rail guidance is essentially a similar concept, except you have rails on the bottom and there's guide wheels on the turret truck. So it's like a roller coaster. Think about it like that. You pull into it, these wheels hit the guides, and it forces you into that space, so you physically can't turn right or left. You can only go straight up and down the aisle to then let the mast and the carriage pick those pallets.
So price-wise, the difference between wire guidance and rail guidance on that forklift unit, what do you think the cost difference is going to be?
You know, it used to be that rail guidance was the inexpensive option, but that's not the case anymore, because now you have to buy the steel to make that rail. So wire guidance is the preferred method now. It's cheaper to install. You also now can access that bottom pallet position because there's not a rail covering it up. You just have a wire built into the floor. That wire attaches to a unit on the wall, which actually sends that signal out. So much more streamlined, much easier to use, less expensive to install.
And less expensive on the steel side. When we're planning out these rack systems, adding another beam level actually affects the overall seismics of that rack, decreases the weight capacity or potential weight capacity. And so not only are we saving on the forklift side of things, but we're actually saving on the steel side, the actual pallet racking that you're going to be storing on. On top of that, the greatest thing that I love about wire guidance is rack safety.
Absolutely.
Turret truck systems usually have the least amount of rack damage. Yes, it happens. Yes, they're faulty situations. People come off the rail or off the wire by accident. But not as often as what we'd see in a reach truck situation or stand-up end control or sit-down forklift.
No, correct, because it's on the wire. It's automatically going up and down. And actually, the rack damage I typically see is when the operator's trying to put the pallet away and isn't really paying attention and actually hits it into the rack, which fortunately causes less damage than a reach truck driving into a beam. But I mean, that's the only thing you really worry about there, and it is much mitigated in that system. But you bring up a great point in talking about the savings on the steel and everything with the rack. When you purchase a turret truck, that is part of a system. That's not, you don't just go buy a turret truck. You want to purchase that with a design in mind, because you want that turret truck to perfectly interface with your rack, because it is one and the same thing. A turret truck can't load trucks. It can't drive around your warehouse and do anything else. It only picks pallets from that rack space.
Exactly.
So, you know, if you need more flexibility, there's other options. So the Flexi option is one. And there's several different brands of forward articulating lifts to consider, but they're more flexible in going in a narrow aisle. They can load and unload trucks, assuming your mast is tall enough, and they can drive around the warehouse more efficiently and safely. A turret truck is a very large piece of equipment. You don't want to drive it up and down your warehouse. And then as you open up even more with like a reach truck, and again, a reach truck, you want to be careful. Any piece of equipment, you want to make sure it fits the parameters of your rack. But a reach truck is a little bit faster than a forward articulating truck in putting pallets away and retrieving them. It's also okay to drive around your warehouse, but it will not load and unload trucks.
Totally.
So again, another thing to consider. And then as you open it up from there, you get, you know, pieces of equipment that are more versatile, but, you know, less space savings in your warehouse because you have to have more space for them to operate.
Awesome. Okay. I get this question asked all the time, and it's one discussion that I love to have with Ken on a daily basis, and it's the topic of double deep reach truck systems. Ken, we're going to talk about double deep reach truck systems. Talk to me. What are the pros and cons in your mind right out of the gates?
With the double deep, you again, this becomes, you have to be very, you know, thoughtful about your rack system. A double deep reach is a normal reach truck that reaches twice as far. So what you can do is you have two pallets stacked one behind the other. And what reason why that system is used is because you can actually have more space, more storage in your warehouse.
Less aisle space is taken up, basically.
Correct. However, I mean, now you have a pantograph system, which is what reaches out from the mast, that is a little bit more expensive in upkeep, requires a little bit better operator to utilize because it's hard to see when you're up at 20 feet and you have to reach, double into the rack. Another thing to consider with a double deep reach truck is it's actually bigger than a standard reach truck because it has to hold that capacity out farther. So obviously if you have a pallet, the farther away it is from your mast, the more capacity you need to, counter that.
Totally.
So a double deep reach is a good option, again, if you don't have crazy throughput, meaning you're not putting away tons and tons of pallets and you want storage density, but you don't want to buy a front articulating lift or a turret truck.
Totally.
But if you can get away with a regular reach truck, I mean, you save a little bit of money and have more flexibility. You want a little bit more density of storage, look into a double deep.
Totally. And it's not one is necessarily going to be better than the other.
Exactly.
Every application, every customer is going to be specifically meeting their needs. Some applications, I think, yes, double deep will work great. Other applications, double deep is going to bury you as a company because you are now going to be double handling every single pallet. You've got way too many product SKU variety, I should say, pallet varieties. So too many different products stored on a pallet. When you run into a situation like that, double deep becomes very expensive to operate.
Yes. This again is why when you're going narrow aisle, it's important not to just talk to your forklift guy. It's important to talk to your systems guy. Whoever is going to design that for you, you want to have a person available to be able to help you understand both sides. So, a good example of that is I work with my outside sales team who sells the rack to tailor what forklift is going to work in that application.
Totally. One of the cool things about Hoy, and this isn't just to sell Hoy, but this is just really speaking to the benefits of working with Hoy is, we pride ourselves on looking at every system from a holistic point of view. We don't want to just look at it from forklift point of view or racking point of view. If we did that, it would cause a lot of problems. We want to look at your business 360 degrees.
Yeah, not everyone needs a reach truck, and it's not beneficial for everyone to have a reach truck. I mean, a lot of companies are perfectly okay using a sit-down LP lift, a cushion tire forklift, which is the forklift that's designed to just be your standard warehouse lift. I mean, if you're just driving a lift indoors, you don't have a food or clean room consideration or anything like that. Your cheapest option is a propane-powered sit-down forklift.
Totally.
They'll work in a 12-foot aisle typically, give or take, depending on the size, and it's the best of all the worlds. You can load and unload trucks. You can go outside, assuming you're not driving over curbs or driving through gravel. And again, a lot of companies just need that. But remember, again, as you narrow up, as you use taller racks, that's when you start considering other equipment.
Totally. Okay, Ken. Next hot topic item that we're going to talk about.
Okay.
Why would I buy a forklift when I could floor stack everything in my warehouse? What's the benefit of putting up racks? And
if you're going to floor stack, you still need a forklift if you're going to stack a pallet on top of a pallet. But if you have the square footage to just keep pallets on the ground, great. But space is at a premium. We've never seen real estate prices this high. So typically you want to go vertical. You want to get the pallets off the floor. You want to be able to store those pallets and maximize your floor space. And that's when you really consider using a forklift. Now, if you're just handling individual boxes and doing kind of a micro fulfillment style business, there's actually other equipment that can help with that. But if you're moving pallets and you want to stack them in racks and you want to maximize your space, forklift is the only option.
Totally. I think you're leading perfectly into what I want to talk next. Talk to me about this. What class of forklift are we looking at right now?
This is not a forklift technically. There's no forks on it. This is a task support vehicle. I don't know if you can see this little model right here. This is a Big Joe. This is a J1 192. So there's a class of products. We call them task support vehicles. It's not a scissor lift and it's not a forklift. But what this allows you to do is, if you're using a rolling ladder in your facility, pretty dangerous, pretty difficult to use. I know years and years ago, that was the only option to go up 12 feet tall and grab a box. The downside to a rolling ladder is people fall up and down them. And that's very expensive for a business to deal with an injured employee. So you have the downtime of not having that employee. You know, you have all those issues that you don't want to deal with.
Workers' compensation.
Exactly. A task support vehicle is designed to safely lift you to that level to grab the product while also being easier to drive than a scissor lift. And so, you know, we represent the Big Joe line, and they make tons of products for doing that of all different sizes. I think you can go up, the tallest model will take your feet up to 210 inches, which means you can pick typically around 280 inches. You can grab boxes, you put it on a tray, and bring those boxes down. Now, it won't put a pallet away, but it will individual boxes or smaller products. That's what it's designed to do. You can bring those down and put those on a pallet elsewhere, or bring them right to shipping to ship out.
I feel like this type of lift that's entered into the market has become very popular and very, very capable for a lot of companies.
You know, if you're selling clothing items, or you have, you know, a lot of e-commerce stuff, you don't need palletized things. You know, it's interesting in how easy with social media it is now to start a business and sell these things, but you're never going to have traditional volumes of stuff that would require a pallet. This is where this comes in. You still will want to rack your warehouse, but instead of, you know, grabbing pallets, you're grabbing boxes or bags or small items, and that's where these come in. They're relatively inexpensive. They're roughly a quarter of the cost of a standard forklift, and it can really make your business versatile, easy to pick product, easy to ship out product, and anyone can operate it. There's not a certification required for this equipment.
The user interface is unbelievable.
It's easy. I come out when we sell these products and I show them how to operate it, and it's amazing how fast, you know, people can pick it up, and it's so much better than having people go up and down ladders.
One of the cool benefits as well is, you know, we talk about narrow aisle applications. When you're dealing with a micro fulfillment center, is what I like to call these systems for boutique shops that are operating off of Instagram sales or, you know, web stores, and they're just selling, you know, whether it be dresses or a certain vertical of apparel. This is going to turn 20,000 square feet into 40,000 square feet. It's going to make it feel
more.
Yeah, it's going to make it feel so much better, because all of a sudden, instead of operating in a 16 or 14 foot aisle, we're in 3 to 4 feet narrow aisle.
Yeah, ultra narrow aisle, because these will work in a smaller aisle than a turret truck. And when you have a small business, especially in the clothing world, you have tons and tons of SKUs, and you have to store those together. And, you know, that means you need to have shelving or rack that's really tall. And this will get you there safely and inexpensively.
Totally. All right, Ken, another popular scenario that I see all the time. I've got significant floor storage. We're not ready to invest in any racking right now. We don't need to go vertically. We're double stacking, sometimes triple stacking our pallets. We're going in and out of our building on a constant basis, and we're storing these pallets, you know, sometimes 8 pallets deep in an aisle, in a lane, and just all of its floor storage. What's the right piece of equipment for this?
So in that type of environment where you don't have a rack consideration, what you're gonna worry about is, you know, how heavy is your pallet, right? And what is your environment like, both indoors and outdoors? So let's say, for example, you have a 3,000 pound pallet, right? You're not lifting it up in the air. You're just putting it in lanes to be shipped out. You know, you always want to think about your safety factor and the capacity of your equipment. So, you know, I tell people the standard industry size is a 5,000 pound capacity lift. And, you know, that's going to have the best resale value. It's the most common. And there's not a huge difference in size between a 5,000 pounder, a 6,000 pounder, and a 3,000 pounder. So I recommend in this made up scenario, a 5,000 pound sit down lift. And let's say that they are going outside, but it's perfectly paved. So if that's the case, you know, you can use a cushion tire LP gas forklift. Now, cushion tire they're usually treaded. You can also get them non-marking and smooth, but if you're going outside a little bit, I recommend treaded, and that way you can go outdoors a little bit, operate perfectly comfortably indoors. You've got a small footprint, and it's perfect for just putting these pallets, loading them on the trucks, and putting them in these aisleways. Now, let's change the scenario a little bit, and let's say that outdoors you have a asphalt lot that has potholes and some gravel, and it's not in great shape. You can still use a 5,000-pound LP gas forklift, but now you want to consider a pneumatic tire. And one thing to always remember about a pneumatic tire forklift is traditionally it's going to be a larger chassis than a cushion tire. It's designed to handle terrain that's a little rougher, and you want that kind of that stability, that safety stability. So it'll go to a larger chassis. And that's what I would recommend in that situation is a pneumatic tire, 5,000-pound lift. It'll handle the rough terrain outdoors better, still perfectly adequate indoors.
What is the difference for a cushion sit down and a pneumatic when it comes to aisle size? Which one's going to be able to offer me a little bit more dense storage inside the warehouse?
A cushion tire lift is smaller. There is some caveats to that, but you're going to be able to work in a smaller aisle with a cushion tire lift majority of the time, especially if a 5,000-pound cushion versus a 5,000-pound pneumatic, it's going to be 12 feet versus 13 and a half feet, 14 feet. So there is a considerable savings if you are going to use that equipment in an aisle.
Totally. You're talking about driving outside. Again, we're going to hit on another forklift that I think offers a lot of variability that most people don't ever think about. But the Flexi is a really cool, versatile forklift because you can drive that thing outside. You can.
Again, it needs to be a smooth, nice surface outdoors, but it is very versatile and it will go outside. You want to be careful with weather. It is an electric piece of equipment. You can get IC, internal combustion engine powered forward articulating lifts that will do better outside. But yeah, that is a pretty good option. It is an expensive option, and so most smaller businesses aren't really interested in that. But if you really need that tight storage space and to go outside and do unload a truck, it may be a viable option. One other thing to consider with that type of equipment, though, is it more advantageous to have a dedicated lift that's going to load your trucks and go outside, and a dedicated lift to put away pallets in your rack? A lot of people will find that, it's better to have a reach truck and then have a ride-on pallet jack put your pallets away. And we haven't talked about pallet jacks. There's walkie pallet jacks and there's rider pallet jacks. So a walkie jack, you walk behind, you put pallets away. It's great, so you don't have to use a manual pallet jack. If you're moving, heavy pallets, short distances, a pallet jack's the way to go. I usually recommend an electric powered pallet jack. That way you're not straining your back. Not everyone can pump up a jack that has 6,000 pounds on it. An electric jack can handle that. Now, if you're going long distances, you're not putting pallets away in the rack. You're just stacking them on the floor or moving them from place to place. A walkie rider is ideal. And you stand on a platform and you steer it with the tiller handle like you'd find on a regular pallet jack. They're very efficient. They're very fast. And they're not expensive. So buying a reach truck and a walkie rider is much cheaper than buying one forward articulating forklift. So again, it's another thing to consider. What are you doing? How does your rack system interface with your maybe production area or your shipping area? And that kind of lets you identify what you need. And so always talk to a forklift specialist or a material handling specialist when you're looking at that, because there are different options.
And there's never just one right answer. And that's what I love about our industry is, we get to look at all sorts of data, and we're going to tell you, hey, this is going to support for case scenario 1. This is going to support for case scenario 2. We want to work with the client to find out what's going to best serve them, what's going to best, turn their operations into a positive investment and return on investment.
Yeah, never have someone tell you need this lift to do this. I mean, you want to, like you said earlier, a holistic approach. You want to look at your business as a whole and what you're trying to achieve, both as far as your storage density, your safety of your operation, your throughput. You have to consider a lot of different variables to pick the equipment that will be ideal for you in your operation.
Awesome. Okay. So Ken, can an electric forklift go outside?
Absolutely. You need to consider what the outside environment is going to be like. So you need to determine if you need cushion tires or pneumatic tires, and you want to be careful with the type of lift you have, and you always want to ask, hey, am I good to use this outside in the rain and in the snow? And in most cases, yes, all modern electric lifts can definitely be used outdoors. Some of them have cabs, heaters, air conditioning. Those are all options. And, that's the same with the lead acid battery and the lithium ion battery. They can all be used outside. And a lot of companies now are going to that because California is mandating that all forklifts in California be electric in soon, like 2030 or something. That's just right around the corner.
Are they going to have issues with those massive forklifts that are moving all the shipping containers, things like that? How are they going to get that weight capacity? What's the technology?
I'm pretty sure.
Is the technology there?
I'm pretty sure that there's some type of loophole for large equipments in a port, like large pieces of equipment in a port. But your average user is going to have to, in California, switch to electric. The good news is that's a pretty mature technology, and it's been around for a long time. It's just now making that switch.
Yeah. Okay, Ken, your honest opinion, if you were running your own warehouse today and you had the choice between an IC sit down, so propane or diesel sit down, versus an electric sit down, which one are you buying?
Well, the first lift I ever operated was electric, and I thought it was great. But here's what you need to consider when thinking about that question yourself. A IC, internal combustion engine forklift, whether it be gas, LP, and even diesel, typically is less expensive up front than an electric truck. However, it's going to be more expensive maintenance-wise throughout its life. Remember, it's a machine with way more moving parts. So consider that. Also consider you're going to have a higher fuel price because you're putting LP gas or gasoline or diesel fuel in it. That's an expense. That's more expensive than paying for your electric bill. Conversely, an electric lift is more expensive up front. Your maintenance cost is going to be less. But one thing that I find a lot of people don't consider is that at some point in the life of that lift, you have to replace the battery. Now, batteries right now are very expensive. Lithium, especially, is usually 4 or 5 times more expensive than a lead acid battery. So you need to make sure you're considering the warranty on your battery in addition to the warranty on your lift, and you really have to focus on the maintenance of that battery. Now, things being equal, 5,000-pound electric cushion sit down, 5,000-pound LP gas cushion sit down, which one would I choose? I would probably choose an electric lift, and I'll tell you why. It's quieter. It has more response in the hydraulic system and the drive system, because remember, electric power gives you instant torque. And the new electric lifts are great because you can feather the controls. That means you barely push down, it barely lifts up or down. They're very simple to operate. People traditionally say that IC trucks have more power. That hasn't been my experience, but I do respect that opinion. And there's no emissions on an electric lift. Unless you're charging the battery and your battery doesn't have enough water in it, in a lead acid battery, then there is off gassing. So consider that if you do have a bunch of lead acid, battery electric lifts, you do have to have a charging station now, and that is yet another expense. But still, ultimately, I'm choosing an electric lift over an LP truck.
That's amazing.
Or IC truck, I should say.
I honestly thought you'd be going the IC route. I honestly thought.
No.
I obviously don't know you.
Now, if I was lifting, 10,000-pound pallets outside and it was, rough terrain, I would probably go with a diesel-powered lift. I mean, the energy density of diesel is great, very powerful, large machines. Usually have very nice cabs with radios in them and things like that. You can get electric lifts that big, but they are, much more expensive. So,
Ken, your most popular forklift that you sell, what is it?
So in the market that I work in Utah, the most popular lift we sell is a sit-down internal combustion engine lift. over the year, it used to be almost all we sold, but over the years, there's been a huge influx of electric equipment, specifically reach trucks. As real estate's more expensive, people are going vertical, and a reach truck is usually the answer for a standard warehouse to go vertical as cheaply as possible. One thing I sell tons and tons of are our stand-up rider pallet jacks, so walkie rider jacks. Because it's a very inexpensive option to move heavy pallets quickly through a warehouse.
Totally.
So a lot of people operate a mixed fleet. So most companies will have reach trucks for the dense storage area. They'll have walkie rider pallet jacks, which will feed shipping and receiving. Shipping and receiving, they're using LP sit-down lifts. So, you're never going to have just one type of lift, especially when you're in a larger operation. You want to really fine tune it to, what task you're doing to be as efficient as possible. And you can save a lot of money doing it that way. If you just had all reach trucks putting everything away in your warehouse, it's not cost effective. There's cheaper things to buy to do that. The
mixed fleet is another great point that you bring up. And, when people are going and graduating to a reach truck or even a turret truck, I love that we can capitalize on those abilities and still complement them with an inexpensive solution, like you just said, a walkie rider. That is a very complementive piece of equipment that's going to help make your turret truck or your reach truck become that much more successful operating in that space.
Well, and like I said, a turret truck isn't supposed to drive out of the aisle. So it's going to set the pallet at the end of the aisle. You grab that pallet with a sit-down forklift or a walkie rider pallet jack or even a walkie pallet jack, move it to the next station, whether that's production or shipping, and then you have equipment that operates better in those areas. I mean, I don't think, we're ever going to see the day where a sit-down propane forklift is going to be antiquated. It's just, for the price point and the capability, it's hard to beat.
Totally. And the reliability. There's a lot of reliability that comes with that piece of equipment where sometimes, poorly manufactured Chinese forklifts that enter into the market.
Correct.
What are your thoughts on that?
You want to stay with established brands. You want to stay with an established dealership. You want a company that can help you service your equipment, make good recommendations, that's going to warranty what you buy from them. That's often overlooked. Just because one brand is great in one area doesn't mean the service is there. I mean, you really want to have a relationship with the company you're buying the equipment with so that they can support you in your business. Because if your equipment goes down, you're not getting pallets out of that rack.
Absolutely.
And so you need to have that support, and it's really a partnership. I try to get to know my clientele and help them out any way I can, have rentals available if something does happen. Everything mechanical at some point will break down or have an issue. And so you want to make sure you're supported with the equipment that you purchase.
Redundancy. Let's talk about redundancy because I think that it's completely valid what you're saying. Working with an established dealership, someone that has a rental fleet that's ready and available. But what happens when we get into those turret truck applications, those flexi applications, the more narrow aisled, narrow tailored systems? You have to think when you have a very specialized system. So you have a very tall building. Let's say you have 50-foot tall building, and you have turret trucks moving pallets in that application. Well, if that turret truck goes down, you can't call someone and get another turret truck. Because it was specially made for that application, and turret trucks are specially made to the application they're in. And in that case, redundancy is vastly overlooked. You need to have an additional turret truck, and I tell clients all the time, hey, you should buy 2 of these because if one does go down, I can get out there that day. I can probably fix it. But let's say something happens where the mast, or the carriage, when they're putting a pallet away, the operator accidentally rams it into the rack, damages it, and it doesn't move. Well, now you're out of business. Whereas, let's say that you had open aisles. Let's say you have 14-foot aisles, and you've got a sit-down LP truck putting stuff away, and let's say that you run over something and you destroy that tire, so that lift doesn't work. Well, you can call me up, and I have 100 of those. I can send you one that day, and you're back in business like nothing ever happened.
the more specialized and taller the equipment gets, the harder it is to do that, and the more you have to worry about your own in-house redundancy.
Totally.
And we do our best to have as much equipment available, both in our rental fleet and in inventory, to support our customers. But when you start talking a 50-foot tall, 5,500-pound capacity turret lift, that's just not something that's going to be available outside of your application.
Totally. And another thing that we continue to see buildings go taller and taller and taller. I think it's completely overlooked by everyone right now of what implications they're going to take on when they move into that building.
Absolutely. So your throughput is going to go way down because you're picking so high. Remember, it takes time for those forks to get up to that height, to grab that pallet, to bring it down. Also, it's harder for the operators to do that. So you're going to have more skilled operators picking pallets at that height. Now, there's lots of different aids to help you in doing that. There's carriage-mounted cameras on most equipment that go that high. There's digital height indicators, and what that does is it tells the operator exactly what height the fork is. So even if he can't quite see if he's lined up, that will tell him, yeah, you're there. Put the forks in the fork pockets in that pallet and pick it off the rack. But it takes more time to pick and put away pallets at height. And obviously, as you narrow the aisles, that takes more time to navigate that system, and that's overlooked more than it should be. And something to consider. As you go higher, the equipment's going to be more expensive. It's going to take more time to pull pallets.
Totally.
And that's why you have people, slow moving pallets. Storage stuff is great for those high dense systems, but if you need to be light on your feet, moving pallets in and out constantly, then that's why a lot of people consider reach truck applications. They consider wider aisle stuff with stand up end control lifts, or even sit down 3-wheel forklifts, which are very maneuverable.
Right. And it all comes back to the great debate of, all right, are we going to invest in this piece of property or in this piece of property? This one, we're going to have less square footage. We're going to have taller ceilings. This one, we're going to have more square footage. We're going to have shorter ceilings. Which one's going to get me more life? Which application is going to get me more life? And that's where we really want to dig into the details of your business. We want to be able to know, okay, as your products hopefully remain similar to what you're doing today, this is what we've envisioned your lifespan in this space. This smaller one, yeah, we get a little bit taller, but that additional, call it 10% more storage space doesn't outweigh the productivity that you'd have in a lower clear height building,
right?
Not going as tall,
right?
And that's just always something to consider. And one thing that a lot of people might do in any system, and it's very common in every system that we sell, it's misapplication. It's them using that piece of equipment the wrong way that it was ever intended to. And that's really where mini load systems, ASRS systems, I think that's where most people fall into. They're like, oh, look at this awesome automated system. It's so fast. I'm going to put everything in that system. Well, when you put in a system like a mini load, you don't want your fast movers in there. That's high density. You want slow movers, things that are going to be very have a lot of variety and skew numbers or whatever. Different products, slow movers. That's where you want to have that super, super dense storage.
It's really important to consider those things. Especially as a lot of these businesses, they have one forklift and business explodes. And a lot of times I see, people missing the next step and jumping into something that maybe isn't right and thinking that it's the answer. But it's really important to think about the future and, what kind of space you're going to have, what type of equipment you think you're going to use, what that's going to cost to get you there. And when you start skipping steps, you find yourself with a monster of a system and realize, oh, I can't get the pallets out of this system.
Totally.
So then the fact that you have the storage is not relevant.
Right.
So again, always have conversations with your local experts, when considering forklifts and storage, racking solutions, because there's lots of variables and there's a lot of equipment out there to support you, but always try to be educated on, what those options are.
Totally. Well, Ken, really appreciate your time today. Thanks for shedding some knowledge and light out here on the warehouse floor.
It's good to be here.